Today, the reading that we'll be doing and the passage we'll be looking at really looks at the idea of what happens when you doubt. When you doubt. That sense of coming into church and listening to stories like Kenny and Debbie and others, and you even maybe when you were reading the psalm together and listening to other people say amen, you might have been sitting there going, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. Doesn't seem to work for me. And the difficulty is you can end up feeling like you're the only person in the building that feels like that. And that somehow, the next stage of thinking like that is that somehow it's sinful. And that you're a rubbish Christian. And that somehow God's not going to engage with you because you're the man or you're the woman sitting there and you're doubting. Well, I'm going to kind of want to look at how John helps us with this. But let me explain what I mean by the areas that we might doubt at times. So there's probably loads, but I thought of 3 areas where we probably, each of us, at some stage or other, have had to confront doubt. Either about, in the area of questions, I don't understand something. So it's kind of like factual. I don't understand how this and that can work together. It's not emotional, it's not spiritual, it's just factual. I don't understand. I just don't understand. And there's lots of, I almost guarantee, whatever you're asking, people in the church, capital C, over 2,000 years have grappled with that question. Okay? I guarantee it. I mean, it can be a little dispiriting to think that because you think, no, I'm much more creative than that. No, over 2,000 years, you're not asking a question that's not been asked before. And sometimes it's good to know that there are people who've grappled with the questions and there may actually be some answers. But there's another sort of doubt, isn't there? There's a fear of what's happening. What's happening to me? What's happening around me? I feel vulnerable. I'm not sure how to make sense of what's going on. And then finally, that confusion. What is happening? What's going on? Faith doesn't seem to make sense. Not intellectually, but just doesn't seem to make sense of my life. The problem with life, as someone has said, is life only seems to make sense as you look back, but you have to live life going forward. And so you come to illness, or you come to bereavement, or you come to tragedy, or you come to some event and you go, I just don't know if it makes sense anymore. My equations don't seem to work anymore. So at this stage, all I want to say to you is, if that has either ever happened to you in the past or whether you're living through it right now, you're not sinful. God's not against you. God's not got a downer on you. He still hears you and he still loves you as much as he did ever and as much as he will ever. Doesn't make you sinful. It just makes you human. And there's not one of us in the room, that hasn't gone through this school at some stage or other and will go through it again. It's not actually one of those things that you solve once and for all. You keep coming round because your life keeps changing. There's new situations, there's new questions, there's new depths, and you have to come round again. And I've long wanted us to be a church where you don't need to feel ashamed to say, actually, that's where I am. That's how I feel. That somehow you won't get hounded out because somehow you're not playing the game. There is no game. There is only this walk of faith. If everything was so obvious all the time, you wouldn't need faith. But we do. We walk by faith, not by sight. So when we read the gospel, as we're going to read in a moment, we're going to read, hang on, we're going to read about, about 4 people, 4 disciples. And the interesting thing about John's gospel is we hardly hear about the disciples. After the first chapter, they hardly crop up. In the other gospels, they're there all the time. You kind of get to know them quite well in the other gospels, but in John's gospels, not at all, except here. And in the passage we're going to read from, you're going to hear from 4 of the disciples. And the 4 of them are all asking questions. Peter's going to come and say to Jesus, we're confused about what's happening. Thomas is going to say, we feel lost. Philip says, can you just make things clearer? And Judas, not Iscariot, the other Judas, is going, why are these things happening? Now, it's helpful for you to keep on remembering that when John's writing his gospel, he's not writing for his Christians and his churches simply that they might understand what happened back then. He's writing to them that they might understand how to live now. So the reason John constructs this next passage from chapter 13 through 14 is because he's wanting his churches to understand what's going on in their lives now. And it's the same for us. It begins with Peter. We're confused. Now, what's worth noticing when we read it, and Maggie's going to come and read it in a moment, what's worth noticing it when you're reading it is, I put the question in yellow on the screen, and what you will notice is that Jesus never seems to answer the question that's being asked. Which I think is pretty much true all through our lives. And it must have been a little irritating. 4 times they ask a really straightforward question, and 4 times Jesus says something that doesn't seem to answer the question. And I wonder if it's because sometimes Jesus is saying to us, let me tell you something deeper than the answer to the question you're actually looking for. You're asking a question, which is a good question, but actually there's something else that you need to know rather than this question. I said last week that all of this from chapter 13 onwards to chapter 19 happens in one evening. Okay, one evening. So this is part of a long conversation that we're picking up on, and the next 2 after this, we'll just keep on picking up on this conversation, but this is how this conversation begins this time. So Max, if you can come.
Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going.
So Peter comes, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus says, where I'm going, you can't come. Lord, why can't I come? I'd give my life for you. And he goes, would you really? You're going to betray me? And then Jesus moves on to say, don't be troubled. You've trusted in God, so trust in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that weren't so, I'd have told you, I'm going ahead of you to prepare for you. Now, that passage, which is chapter 14, verses 1 to 3, we've normally read it in funeral services. And so our automatic thought about what he's talking about at that point is Jesus is talking about going to heaven, and in heaven, and then we build this brilliant picture. In heaven, there's going to be lots of rooms, and there'll be a room for the Church of England, and there'll be a room for Baptists, and there'll be a room for Methodists, and then there'll be a room somewhere a long way away for noisy Pentecostals. And we build this whole picture of what heaven would be like. And I don't think that this is actually what that passage is saying. I think when you go and you die, I think what happens is you go and be with the Lord, and you're conscious of his presence, and you're waiting for a resurrection. But I don't think this is actually about heaven. Where's Jesus going in John's gospel? Well, let's just have a think for a minute. My Father's house. You've heard this phrase before, and you've heard Jesus talk about my Father's house. When in Luke's gospel, when Jesus is 12 years old, his mum and dad lose him. It's easy to lose a 12-year-old, and sometimes it's preferable to lose a 12-year-old. But they lose him because they each think he's with the other, a common feature. And when they find him, he's in the temple. And do you remember what he says to them? Didn't you think I'd be in my Father's house? I'm in the temple. He's going to say in John's gospel that this temple, my body, where Jesus is where you're fully loved, where you're fully accepted, where you're fully safe. John's gospel is one of the themes that run right from the first chapter all the way through to the end, is that the disciples want to know, where are you going? Where will you be? And Jesus keeps saying to them, will you abide with me? Will you make your home with me? Where are you going? I'm going ahead of you, but I'm going ahead of you to make a home for you with me. It's not about what happens when you die. It's about what happens while you live. So, we're confused, Peter says. And Jesus says two things. I know what will happen. I know what you'll do, Peter. And I will make my home with you. There'll be a relationship that is closer than you can imagine. And it's not when you die, it's here and now. Let's read the next one. Thomas says, we feel lost. Jesus finished that little bit with Peter saying, this is where I'm going, and I'm going to come back for you. And let's hear what Thomas says.
Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do not know him.
No, you do know him.
You do know him and have seen him.
Changes the meaning of the passage for the vice. Thomas, where are you going? We don't know where you're going. So how can we know the way? And then really famous next verse, isn't it? You've seen it on railway stations, on billboards. You've seen crazy people in marketplaces with a banner. And it's taken out of context. What is Jesus saying to Thomas? Thomas is going, Jesus, I just don't know. I'm just lost. I feel lost. And Jesus is saying, take my hand. Because I'm the way. Take my hand because I'm the truth about God. Take my hand because I'm the one that will give you life. I'm the safest one that you know. We spend the most of our lives trying to work out what we're going to do, where we're going to be, what will our life look like. Sometimes some people get to the end of life and they just regret so much of what their life became. And Jesus stands amongst us and goes, I know you're worried about where you're going, but hold my hand. I'll take you. I'll take you. I'll take you to the next moment of your life. I'll take you as you go to the doctor's surgery and you have to listen to news that you're not certain about. Hold my hand. I'll take you into the workplace where you're not sure whether you fit. Hold my hand. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Hold my hand when you're not sure about what's happening to the relationships around you. Thomas, just tell us where you're going and then we'll do it because we can make it happen, Jesus. And Jesus says, will you be vulnerable enough just to go, I don't know where we're going next, but I'll hold your hand. I don't know where. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I'll hold your hand. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the one by whom you'll know the Father. Trust me. Hold on to me. I'll lead you. Philip says, Jesus, and you can, I think, reading John's Gospel, some of you will have felt this already. Just make it clearer. Just make it simpler, please, Jesus. And Philip is the patron saint of people who just get full of, oh, Jesus, just make it simple. And this is what happens.
Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. And I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it.
Philip, why can't things be clearer? And Jesus says, believe me or trust me. Trust me. He says three things. Trust what you've heard. Trust what you've seen. And then he has that final couple of sentences. Because you're going to be able to do greater things than you've seen yet. And I'm going to deal with that next week when we look at the work of the Spirit. But at the moment, just those two things that he says to Philip. When Philip says, why can't things be clearer? Why can't you make it simpler? Jesus simply says two things. Trust what you've heard and trust what you've seen. Trust what you've heard and trust what you've seen. Now the problem is when we go through periods of doubt, we forget. And that's why it's really good, sensible practice to keep some sort of journal, some sort of notes. Because on the day when everything's bad, it's easy to think it's always been bad and it always will be bad. It's easy to think on the dark days, it's never been sun and it never will be sun. It's like, It's quite strange to see the sun literally today, isn't it? And it's like, it's always rained, it always will rain. And a journal tells you a different story. If you jot down, if you notice what's happening with you, you will remember what you've heard and you will remember what you've seen. And the reason you write down or you take note or you take a picture, whatever it is, whatever works for you, is not for the good days. It's always for the bad days. When I doubt, I need to hold to what I've heard and I need to trust what I've seen. And then last one, Judas simply says, why are you working like this, Jesus? Why are these things happening? Why haven't you shown yourself to the world? Why are you doing it this way? And this is what Jesus says.
Then Judas, not Judas Iscariot, said, "But Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the world?" Jesus replied, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Anyone who does not love me will not obey my teaching. These words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me. All this I have spoken while still with you. But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid."
Judas just can't understand it. Why are you doing it this way? And I wonder how many of us would go, I've asked that question loads of times. And Jesus says, I'm doing something you can't be aware of. You're not alone. And peace is offered to you. You're not alone because the Spirit has been sent. And peace is the offer that he gives you. Why are these things happening? You're not alone. In the midst of the uncertainty, there's peace. The questions we ask and the uncertainty that it expresses are not sinful. They're honest. But what they can do is they can lead us to a new understanding who Jesus is. But the difficulty comes if you bottle it all up. The difficulty comes if you don't find someone else to go, do you know what? I'm just having a tricky time at the moment. The difficulty is if you think you can solve it all on your own. There's something about actually being able to bring it out into the open that allows God to speak to you. There's something about allowing Jesus to come near to you. There's something about understanding in greater depths. See, I think there's certain phases of life where you need to ask these questions. I think as a young adult, you need to ask these questions. I think as a young adult, you need to move from teenage faith to adult faith. I think midlife, you ask these questions. When you've been in church for 20 years, perhaps, but now in midlife, you're wondering what's it all about. And I think this is another moment where actually new growth happens. And I actually think in older life, when you look back at your own life and you wonder, well, what has all that meant? That's another moment of growth where you go, who's Jesus now to me? In other words, these are not questions that we answer once, but we answer at different points in our lives. And they're good questions because they lead us to Jesus if we can be honest about it. And Jesus answers, I know what will happen. I'll make my home with you. Hold on to me. I'll lead you. Trust what you've heard. Trust what you've seen. You're not alone. The offer of shalom, of peace, comes to you. Take it. Doubt and faith are not opposites. Doubt can be the midwife to greater faith and a deeper faith. 4 disciples, 4 questions, questioning Jesus. 4 moments where Jesus goes, let me tell you more about my relationship with you. 4 times Jesus says to them, you don't understand, but I'm the principal actor here, not you. You may not understand, but I'm the one at work here. 4 disciples' questions, written down by John, not simply to say, once upon a time, this is what disciples wondered, but written down for a community of faith who've had to hit the hard buffers of life, who ask the same questions and need the same responses. I wonder what your questions would be. And I wonder what you need Jesus to say to you.